Hoff Hoff was perfectly formed. He had 10 perfect fingers and toes.
Welcome to Still a Part of Us, a podcast where moms and dads share the story of their child who was stillborn or who died in infancy. I'm Winter Red, and on this episode, Paige is telling the story of her son Hoff. They discovered he had a chromosome abnormality at their 13-week ultrasound and died right before 20 weeks. As a word of caution to our listeners, this story contains emotional triggers of stillbirth and infant loss. Please keep yourself emotionally and mentally healthy and seek help if needed. Paige, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your sweet son. We're excited to hear about this, and I feel like a very unique situation. So thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So let's tell me a little bit about yourself and who's in your family currently and where you guys are from, like area that you generally live in.
I have two very rambunctious boys. I have a 3-year-old named Finley and a 6-month-old named Theodore. And my husband and I are based in San Francisco.
Okay.
So even though we were both born pretty far from San Francisco, I'm from New Orleans. My husband's from Germany. We both work in tech now, and so we've been in San Francisco for almost 10 years.
Oh,
And
that's a good long time. It just probably is starting to feel like home.
it is. It is starting to feel like home, and we really enjoy living in the area.
Oh, that's wonderful. And so at the time of Hoff's birth, were you guys living in San Francisco then?
We were.
Okay, wonderful. And so you guys both do stuff in the tech industry. Any other hobbies or things you guys like to do as a family or as yourself?
Yeah, I think if we weren't working in tech, I think we would spend our time renovating rooms and houses. We actually are renovating our house currently. My husband, if he wasn't a software engineer, he would be a woodworker. I am convinced.
Really?
He loves to build things. He loves to fix things. And so when we lived in an apartment, he would build our bookshelves and our bed. And now that we're in a home, we live in an old Victorian,
Hmm.
and we are in the process of renovating it. And he loves to do what he can himself. He just gets a lot of satisfaction from it. And I love to decorate. So if we weren't working on our computers, we would totally be out there renovating houses.
That is really cool. You guys it's so funny because I think it's funny that you're in a very abstract world with computer stuff, but then very hands-on with some other hobbies and such.
Yes, it's a nice break from, living on the computer. It's
Yes.
nice to actually get your hands involved in something.
Yeah, that's great. And then obviously you're busy with your two boys, it sounds like.
Yes.
How old were they when Hoff was born?
So, my youngest had not been born yet. He is my rainbow baby.
Mhm.
And Finley was a year and a half old.
Okay. And just to give everybody a little bit of context, when was Hoff born?
Hoff was born in January of 2019.
Okay, so still fairly new, I would say. I think that's just 18 months at the time of this recording or so. And so that's still very new. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
And so tell me about how that pregnancy went then. Were you guys planning on having him? Did you have any fertility issues? That type of thing?
So we got pregnant with Hoff relatively easy. Similarly to Finley, we got pregnant with Finley pretty quickly. I had really prepared my husband for it to take a really long time, and I was surprised when it didn't. And then when it got time for us to think about having our second child, I told him again. I said it's not going to happen as quickly as it did before. Just get ready. We're in our mid to late 30s, and it did. It happened on about the second time we were trying. And so we were a little bit surprised.
Yeah.
And with Finley, I had had a very healthy pregnancy, but I had been very anxious.
Mm,
I had known people in from my hometown that had stillbirths, and so I wasn't naive enough to think that there was this magical week in which everything was completely safe. And so I did go through my birth with Finley being anxious and nervous that he was not going to make it. And so when I got pregnant with Hoff, I really wanted that pregnancy to feel different. I wanted to feel and allow myself to feel that excitement.
mm,
And I wanted to be less anxious. And I had some confidence built up from Finley. In my mind, I thought, I had a healthy pregnancy and everything went smoothly. And there's no reason to think that this pregnancy will not be healthy. So I went into it just kind of with this gusto,
yeah.
like, all right, everything's going to be great.
Yeah,
And we can tell people,
yeah, we wanna tell people, right? You just are so
I want to
excited.
tell people I told my favorite barista, like, the day after I found out I was pregnant. We hadn't announced it socially. We weren't going to announce it socially for a little bit, but I told my close friends. You start to show a lot sooner. So
Mhm,
I sort of embraced it. And I was just feeling really confident in
mhm.
it, and in myself.
And were you feeling good too, like, physically?
I was feeling pretty good. I had a little bit less nausea than I had with my first, and I would say I was a little bit more tired, but part of that is just life with a toddler
Yeah, exactly.
and
And
you're just
working
running around
full-time
everywhere,
probably, exactly, yeah,
working
just
full time.
busy.
But other than that, I felt physically pretty good.
I do find it interesting that you were very aware of stillbirth, like, so many people we've talked to, and for ourselves also, that was not on our radar. It was so out of the blue, so the fact that you even had some sort of experience and were those close friends, or was it just, maybe just acquaintances that you were aware of?
It was a mixture. So I had a friend that I grew up with who, we went to the same church and we were in the same youth group together. And then I had some acquaintances. And when I was pregnant with my first, I actually reached out to my friend and I said, "I am so anxious. How did you get through your subsequent pregnancies after you lost your daughter?" And so it's ironic that I have this conversation on my phone with her,
Right.
um, before I ever lost a child about anxiety and pregnancy.
Yeah, that is it's so interesting. I just a little bit of preparation, but it's interesting that it was on your first pregnancy that
Yeah,
turned out fine, and you went in with the second one with a little bit more confidence, or you like, "I got this," and
yeah,
so
it's
and
gonna be fine.
yeah, it's gonna be fine. So tell me what happened as you went to appointments and such. Tell me what
Mhm.
happened.
Yeah. So my first trimester was very normal. Everything in all of the ultrasounds that we had were very normal. The blood work that we had gotten back so far was normal. My symptoms didn't really differ that much from my first pregnancy, so there was nothing that really concerned me. I had one moment where I went to the restroom and I had a tiny speck of blood, and that was the one thing that was different. And of course, I panicked in that moment, and my doctor said, "There's not really anything we can do right now. Just monitor it, and if there's not more bleeding, then you should be fine."
Okay.
And there wasn't. And so everything after that was just really, really fine and normal. It got to be the appointment where you do your nuchal translucency ultrasound,
Okay.
and I was about 14 weeks. So I think the cutoff for that ultrasound is about 13 to 14 weeks, and
Mhm.
due to our really crazy schedule, I was right at the cusp of
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
And everything had been so normal. I wasn't even thinking of all of the things that could happen in that ultrasound.
Yeah.
Um, it was holiday season, so we were really busy, and my husband couldn't come with me to that ultrasound, and I said that was fine.
Yeah.
Um, I thought that it would be a really kind of in and out quick appointment. Maybe I would have to wait to be seen, but after that, I would get home really quickly. And I
Yeah.
had all of these plans that I was going to do the rest of the
Of
day.
course.
I
Of
was going to go
course.
straight from the appointment to the this favorite children's clothing store in the neighborhood, and I would be home by like 2 p.m. I went into the ultrasound room they put the wand on my belly, and the first thing I looked for was the heartbeat,
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
course,
Yep.
and I saw it. And the baby was moving around a lot, and I remember thinking that I was going to message my husband about the baby moving around so much and how amazing that was, and, maybe he was like a future soccer player. Um, and the ultrasound technician did not say very much, but I honestly didn't read anything into that. I I'm not in the medical field, so to my eyes, everything looked fine.
Yeah.
Um, and I know that they can't say very much, so I wasn't getting nervous yet. After the ultrasound, he said, "The doctor will be in a minute," which that I knew that the doctor had to come in and confirm everything. So we left the room, and then the oddest thing happened. I think there are moments throughout my story where I can see my faith is very important to me, and I can see God's hand in these moments. And when he left the room, I was suddenly overcome with this wave of sadness, and I
Oh.
started crying, sobbing. I was sobbing. I couldn't catch my breath. And it was like God had prepared me in that moment that the doctor was about to come in and tell me something that was going to change everything. The doctor came in and she had that look on her face that if you have lost a baby or if you have, like me, if you have a terminal pregnancy, you learn that look. And she said, I'm so sorry. The baby has more fluid than what we would like. And so the baby had fluid behind his neck and also down his back,
Mhm.
which I learned is a very serious sign. Um, the baby's fluid was measuring like over 4.0, and it really should be measuring like under 1. Um, she said, "We're going to take you back to a genetic counselor and she's going to talk about your options." And she kind of didn't say anything other than that. So I felt like everything was in a tailspin. She walked me back to the genetic counselor, and the genetic counselor, bless her heart, she was this like very young, new counselor, and I think I was one of her first
Oh.
like terminal cases.
Yeah.
And I felt at times like I was sort of holding her hand. Um, she said she went through what our options were, and she said, you can have an amniocentesis that can figure out whether or not there's a chromosome abnormality that's causing this fluid, which a lot of times is the case.
Mhm.
We can do the blood work that you're already signed up to do, which can show us with some amount of certainty whether something's wrong, or you can choose to do nothing. And then she told me, she said there are couples that choose not to move forward. And I asked her, I said, "You just said that it could be nothing possibly, and maybe the fluid can resolve itself. Like that's possible that there's nothing wrong genetically with this baby. There's something else causing this fluid." I asked her, I said, "Do couples still not move forward with pregnancy at this point, knowing as much as I know?" And she said, "With the amount of fluid that your baby has, yes." And so I knew that my baby was very sick.
Yeah.
Um, I had messaged my husband. I messaged him. I said, "Are you alone?" And I called him and the genetics counselor, and I talked to him. It was a Friday afternoon, and there was no telling if they could get me in to do an amniocentesis that afternoon. And if they couldn't, it would add at least a week of waiting.
Mhm.
Um, but amazingly, the doctor that was allowed to do the amniocentesis was still there. They were able to squeeze me in. It was just a blessing that I got in. She said, you should hear within the next few days. We were planning on telling our families that following week. And because everything was so unknown, we decided to wait. Um, and so I texted some dear friends and I said, "This is not how I imagined, telling you that I'm pregnant, but we need your prayers." And I told our friends that we had told already we were pregnant. And then we just sat in this limbo for a week.
Oh.
Um, and my husband really harped on the genetics counselor giving us the option of not moving forward. And he kept going back to that and saying, like, why would she say that if it wasn't serious? It must be serious. But he's also, of the two of us, the optimist.
Yeah.
So he was at the same time trying to be more optimistic and saying, we won't know until we know
Yeah.
what's wrong. And I am not the optimist in the relationship. And so I was trying to really hold on to his positivity. I researched different genetic abnormalities. I researched different, it could be a trisomy 21, trisomy 18, and et cetera. And some of those are some of those are fatal. And so I wanted to be prepared for what it could be. The genetics counselor called it was about 4 days later,
Mm-hmm.
not counting a weekend,
Mm-hmm.
and she said it's trisomy 21, which is Down syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a very mixed reaction. On one hand, I was relieved
Yeah.
because I had been prepared for a fatal diagnosis,
Right.
one that we knew the baby would not survive. And then on the other hand, to be very honest with you, I was part of me was still devastated.
Right.
I I wanted that dream call, the call that said, "Everything is fine." And then we'll go back to the doctor's appointment and all the fluid's gone and look at this miracle.
Yeah.
Um, but she said, you know, our concern is that your risk of miscarriage at this point is very high with um, with the fluid that we know your baby has. And so I felt like I couldn't even let that tiny part of me that was relieved expand any and celebrate anything because at the same time she gave me this, uh, this
This
she
possibility
was
still.
this possibility that I could lose the baby,
Yeah.
and there's a strong likelihood that I would. And so um, I really, I so wanted to get to that day when she told me what was wrong because I thought, okay, we're not going to be in limbo anymore. But we just continue to be in limbo.
Uh-huh.
And
Exactly.
and I think that's the thing about one thing that I've learned about having a pregnancy with a terminal diagnosis is you just continue to stay in limbo until the baby passes away. And I wish I had known that at the beginning. I just kept waiting for that moment when we would get to move forward,
Yeah.
move
Move
somewhere.
somewhere.
Um, and it wasn't. We were just in limbo again. As is true with most difficult diagnosis, we immediately had like many follow up appointments scheduled with several different specialists, and so um, it at that point I was still. I got off the phone and I texted my friends, and I was still able to really pray for a miracle. We had an ultrasound scheduled for about a week from then, and I prayed that we would go in there and find that the fluid had gone. And then we would just be looking at, what it would take to make sure that we were prepared to deliver a baby with Down syndrome.
Right.
And and I knew, in this day and age with treatments that are available and with support groups that are available, like children with Down syndrome can have very full lives. And
They
so
can.
I had gotten off the phone and the next day contacted the Down Syndrome Society of San Francisco, and I had gotten connected with a really precious mom. And I just felt like, we can do this. We have the resources. We are prepared. We've got this. But at the same time, we were given this strong likelihood that that baby wouldn't even make it. And so
So you were being
it was,
told at all of these follow-up appointments that, gosh, I mean, there's still this possibility, not just the geneticist, but the
yeah,
doctors were also telling you this.
yes. We went into our follow up appointment, the one in which I had prayed that they would say, "Oh, the fluid's gone." And the fluid had increased.
Oh,
There was more fluid. And this is the appointment that I still had this little glimmer of hope inside of me. And the doctor told me that the baby was dying. I asked the doctor if the baby was dying, and the doctor said yes. Um, I asked the doctor if the baby felt pain, which I know is incredibly difficult for them to tell you. Um, and she said, we can look at some vital signs to know whether or not the baby's in distress. Um, the baby has a very high heartbeat, which can be true of Down syndrome babies. Um, the doctor said it was in her opinion that the baby was working really hard to pump his heart. And that ultrasound did not look at the heart, but she could tell from what she could see that there was something wrong with the heart.
Oh.
And so,
And that often
um,
happens, like heart issues are a pretty common issue
yes,
with Down syndrome.
they are. It was that moment where things shifted for me. I think I have always thought I would believe and act one way if I was in the situation where my child had a fatal diagnosis. And in that moment, when I heard the words, "Your baby is dying," and when the doctor said it was in her opinion that the baby was working really hard to pump his heart, I just, I felt so sad for my baby. And I thought, I don't want him to have to work so hard to pump his heart. I don't want him to have to suffer any. And suddenly, this decision loomed in the room that I never thought I would consider ever. And I went home and I just cried and I cried to God. I cried out to him and I said, I do not want to make this decision. Please don't let me make this decision. I couldn't live with myself. I said, if the baby won't live, take the baby, please. Just take him. And that felt like a prayer that I never thought I would pray, ever. You never think you will pray, God, please take my baby.
Yeah.
It that began the ritual of like every night I would let myself cry in the shower. I had a toddler, life couldn't stop. I couldn't crawl under a blanket and stop living, and I had to keep it together. And so, at when I took a shower, that's when I would let myself just kind of fall apart.
Sure.
And every night I would cry and I would pray that God would just take him peacefully. And I think logistically we knew that we didn't have a lot of time.
Mhm.
I was progressing well into my second trimester. The thing about a terminal pregnancy that you also don't think about is you continue to grow bigger and to the outside world, you're starting to look like this pregnant person. And you have to act like everything is fine
Yeah.
for most of for most of the time.
Yeah.
I was still working at this point. I tried really hard to conceal my pregnancy, but there was only so much I could do. And um, I know my demeanor had shifted. I know I had this sad look on my face that I carried with me all day long. And so even if they couldn't tell, even if they thought that I just, eaten a lot of tacos, um, they I had a look on my face.
Yeah.
I did not look like somebody who everything was going fine. I
Yeah.
looked like somebody that something was wrong. And I'd have to balance this, like, I would go into a meeting and then I would have to slip into a conference room to have a phone call with a specialist about,
Mm.
ho the baby's heart, and so I was felt like I was constantly in between this world of my work, where I had to pretend like everything was fine, and this world where my baby was dying, and I couldn't tell anyone at work. We had, follow-up appointments after that that did look at the baby's heart, and it was confirmed that the baby's heart was deformed. It was missing a ventricle.
Mm.
The doctor told us that usually, if the baby is otherwise healthy, that they would, after the baby was born, if the baby made it full term, they would almost immediately go into surgery. Eventually, probably need to look at getting a heart transplant.
Yeah.
But because the baby had Down syndrome, they were not going to consider surgery. So that was the the third confirmation for us that if the baby did make it to term, likely would pass away shortly
Right.
after.
Mm.
Um, and we wanted to know if there was any sort of procedure we hadn't thought of, if there was any, any life-saving thing that could be done for him. And we were just being told on all fronts that no. I think I felt frozen. I mentioned that we felt in limbo. After that first ultrasound that showed something was wrong, we stopped planning. We didn't know if we didn't think we would need to buy clothes. We didn't think we'd have a baby to bring home. We I didn't think about names. Even though my toddler could see that my belly was getting bigger, I didn't mention anything to him. We
Oh,
didn't start talking about a brother,
yeah.
we're gonna have a baby. All planning ceased. And I just kept thinking, how am I going to make it, 3 more months of this, waking up and wondering, is this the day that the baby dies? Is
Yeah.
this the day that we lose him?
Yeah.
Um, I've likened terminal pregnancy before to like carrying a death sentence, and it felt a lot like that. There's a lot I wish I had done differently now in carrying this baby. One of which is that I wish I had been able to find it in myself to celebrate some little things with him. But at the time, I just felt frozen in my grief. Um, I've since learned about the term anticipatory grief.
Yeah.
And I explain it to people like, if your loved one got cancer, a terminal cancer diagnosis, you would grieve that diagnosis, but you wouldn't begin to grieve them because they're not gone
Mhm.
yet. And so it was a lot like that. We just felt like we couldn't grieve the baby completely because he was still with us, but we were anticipating that we were going to lose him. It felt exhausting.
Yeah.
I felt exhausted.
Yeah.
Um, we, because of the fluid, I didn't feel him very much,
Mm.
um, but I had started to feel him a little bit. And then one night, I was playing on my bed with my toddler. I was laying down, and I felt this pop, and it felt different enough for me to think, something. I
Some
think something happened.
mm.
There wasn't anything outwardly. I didn't. There wasn't any. My water didn't break.
Yeah.
I wasn't bleeding, but there was. I felt like something inside of me did something.
Uh-huh.
It was a Thursday night, and Friday we were going to do another ultrasound at another hospital to get a second opinion. And so I just thought, okay, we'll just wait. And because I didn't feel him frequently because of his fluid, I didn't, I couldn't do, I couldn't do kick counts or anything like that.
Right. Mhm.
And so the next day we went to the hospital, to a different hospital to get what was to be our second opinion. And it was a teaching hospital, and they were incredibly busy. We walked in and they were like super delayed and backed up. And so we had planned to do this ultrasound and then go back to our offices and continue with a day of meetings. And we just, the wait time started getting longer and longer, and our meetings were slowly like
Yeah.
progressing. And we were canceling meeting
Yeah.
after meeting. And my husband was getting more and more anxious. We finally got back to the ultrasound room, and my husband was like so on edge. Um, and he was like, "What happened?" And the poor little ultrasound technician was just like, it's a day.
Yes, it
It's a
happens.
day. Um, I was ready to just get it over with. One thing I felt with every appointment that I had, the minute that they would put a heart monitor on my belly, I would tense up for a moment because I was thinking, God, if you could take him and not let him suffer, please do so. And this is what was so backwards about it. They would put the monitor to my belly. I would hear the heartbeat, and my heart would sink a little bit, and I would think, okay, he's still alive. Part of me would be grateful, and part of me was honestly sad,
Yeah.
um, because it was one more day to full term, one more day to making any decision if we didn't want to move forward. And I should note that through this whole decision process, we had called our family pastor in, and our pastor. and to talk with them about this because it's one of those things that I think it's easy for people to judge from the outside until you are faced with
The
those words
decision.
about your baby.
Yeah.
Um, and we, above all, wanted to do the right thing for him and didn't want to let our selfishness get in the way. And so, every appointment, I was like, gosh, you're a fighter. I mean, you just keep hanging on. There's no reason why you should be, and you are. And I don't know what to think about that. um, and so this appointment, we laid down. The screen that you look at was broken. So the screen that would be in front of me to see the
Oh,
baby
okay.
was black. I couldn't see anything. The ultrasound technician put the wand on my belly and immediately started asking me questions. She asked me, when did I last hear his heartbeat? And I had been to the doctor's just a few days before. She started asking me about what we knew about his heart, and I started going into his history thinking that she hadn't read his notes or maybe
Mm-hmm.
she was confused. We were at the point where you would get your anatomy scan, and so I thought maybe she's thinking like, "This is our anatomy scan, and gosh, she's gonna have some bad news to deliver." And,
Yeah.
um, I started going into his history, and then I stopped myself, and I looked at her, and I said, "There's no heartbeat, is there?" And she said, "No, I'm so sorry." And you know that I had prayed all along for God to take him if he was suffering. And yet, that moment that she told me he was gone, I just felt this emptiness and this deep grief. There wasn't a relief or like celebration. Um, they took us to a side room to let us gather ourselves, and they, called my doctor so that the logistics could start to form about what we were going to do. Um, we had to walk out in front of all those pregnant people. I think I was in shock because I actually went back to the office to gather some stuff at my desk, and I passed by a couple people and, like, totally didn't say anything, that would let it on that I had just learned that my son had died. I went back home and talked to my doctor, and we decided that we would go in the next day to deliver. I went to the doctor's office that afternoon to get the pill to start, like, ripening your cervix, and we let our friends know. I've shared this with people before, but I think one of the sweetest things for me in this experience was seeing our community come around us, and especially because we live really far from family, and so when we told our close friends what had happened, our one friend was immediately asking us, "Can we pick up your toddler? They can stay with us tomorrow." I have a play group that I go to every Saturday, and the woman who hosts it said, "Bring him, have your husband drop him off, keep him with us. Y'all have some time to yourself." My brother had just moved to the area, thankfully, and he was going to watch my son while we went to the hospital. My mom wanted to fly in, and it was so quick, I felt like I would like, that would be more of a burden to her.
Yeah.
Um, and we actually had planned on going to a wedding, shortly after, and so back home, and so we said, you know, "Just wait. I don't know if this is how I want you to experience this. We have our family here in San Francisco around us." And so, the next day, I packed my bags. My son was too young to really know it was happening, so we told him, Uncle Just would be watching him, and we'll see him. The next day, we have to go away, and we went to the hospital. I had known from watching a movie about stillbirths a little bit of what to expect. And we walked in the hospital, and they had put on our door a purple butterfly, and they had us at the very end of the hallway, which was a big I was so thankful for that. Our hospital has, was very quiet the entire time we were there, which was really a blessing. It was, in 8 PM in the evening when we arrived, so we knew we had a long night ahead of us, and they had told us, "Your body is not ready for labor, so it could take a really long time." I had not been induced with my first, so I really didn't know what to expect.
Hmm.
Um, they started the medication and they told me, they said, "You can get any pain medicine you want, so just let us know." And so I took a little, but I felt like I had this obligation to feel some of it, and so I wanted to feel some of it. I wanted to feel the pain. I wanted to feel physically what I felt in my heart. I wanted
Yeah.
it to, like, match.
Yeah.
Um, and so they started the medication. My husband and I tried to get some sleep. I would get up and go to the bathroom, and I was really nervous that I was going to deliver the baby alone. And so every time I got up to go to the bathroom, I was really nervous. And then at one point at 3 a.m., I felt the baby come out. Um, I didn't really push for him as much. He was, 20 weeks is tiny. Um, and so I called for the nurse. My husband woke up. Um, I had asked the nurses to wrap him in a blanket first before they gave him to me. And we had brought from our home, we had brought the smallest blanket we could find. We didn't have any clothes because we hadn't bought anything for
Yeah.
him. And so they wrapped him in a blanket. And I was honestly a little nervous about seeing him because I just wasn't sure what he would look like, especially being so ill. They were very sweet with me. It was dark in the room and quiet. The midwife handed him to me, and I looked at him, and I I thought, "You are this perfectly formed baby." His hands were perfect, his feet were perfect, he was perfectly formed. His little face, you could tell that he was swollen, but he was a little baby. I felt so sorry for him. I felt sorry that I had let him down, like, my body had let him down. I held him for a while. Um, it wasn't the midwives were really precious with us, but it wasn't clear how long we would have with him, and I didn't think in my mind, you're just hindsight is 2020, and in the moment, you're just so emotionally wrecked. Um, there are things that I would have wanted to do with him that I wish I could go back and do them, and I just didn't. Um, I I I wanted to I should have read to him. I wanted to read to him. I didn't read to him. I should have looked at him more. I think I hear this a lot from other lost moms, like, I should have looked at him more. I should have run my hands over his body more because that's the only time you'll ever get to see him on this side of earth, and I should have really had that moment and just soaked him in. I went to sleep for a little while holding him. My husband had been very cautious about holding him at first, but I had to get up to go to the bathroom, and I said, "Can you hold him?" And he said and he did. And, I never see him cry. I've seen him cry once when we got married, and then in that moment, when I came out of the bathroom, and, as time went on, he got colder, and that made me really sad. And around noon that day, I felt like it was time to say goodbye. I wanted to get home to my son. I felt this urge to run home to my son.
Yeah.
Um, and my wife came in, and I'm not sure how I got the strength to tell her that it was time, but I did. Uh, I said, I handed him over. She was so precious with us. She said she talked about how cute he was and that she was going to go show the other nurses, and that meant a lot because I know a little baby like that doesn't look like babies that we are accustomed to seeing, and it meant a lot to me that she said that she was treating him like he was this, chubby, chunky, precious little guy.
Yeah.
Um, and that was the hardest moment. I think I believe I have a faith that I will see him again and that I will see him whole and healthy. But for now, that was it. That's it. That's the last time I'll see him and hold him. And it is this deep, awful feeling to know that you're handing him over to somebody else and that he's going to go in a dark, cold place,
Yeah.
even though you know he's not really there.
Yeah.
Um, it's just the body. Um,
It's still an awful feeling.
it's still an awful feeling. We met with a social worker, and then we had all those, like, I call them terrible logistics that you have to do after you lose a baby. I we went home shortly after, and the next day had to call the funeral home. We decided we wanted to cremate him because we're not from San Francisco, and suddenly we had to face this question of, like, where would we bury a child? This isn't really our home,
Yeah.
um, and so we decided we wanted to cremate him so we could have him with us wherever we were. I had to call the funeral home the next day, and the following day, we had to go in and see them, and that was another one of those things that I felt obligated to do, even though they told us, the mother doesn't have to come in, your husband can come in and sign papers. I felt like I'm not gonna get to do other things for my son, I don't get to plan his birthday, I don't get to drive him to school. I can do this thing. I can do this thing for him.
Yeah.
And so, um, we went to the funeral home, and that in itself was an awful experience, just filling out that awful form
Yeah.
and answering their questions. And I looked to my husband and I said, I don't want to ever do this again. Like, you promised me we will never do this again. We found an urn. My husband's job was to find the urn. That's what he did. That was his thing. And he found an urn by this potter in Portland who made urns that looked like pieces of pottery we would own.
Oh,
And we were so thankful to have found it. And he sits on our bookshelf now. Um, I didn't go back to work for a little while.
good.
I took some time. I took about a month, and then I went back to work and realized that that was too soon, and I went home for a few more weeks. I think going back to work after a loss is jarring for you and the people around you, and I knew when I walked in that door, my pregnant belly wasn't there anymore. I had left without explanation the day that he died, and I didn't want to be that person that everybody knew what had happened, but nobody was voicing it.
Yeah.
Um, and so when I finally did go back to work, I had a precious team who I did tell what had happened, and they had just been really supportive. And someone gave me a book on hope, and we had decided to call our son's name Hoff, which is German for hope.
Oh,
Um,
that's wonderful.
we we felt like, in that moment when you're faced with the loss of your child, know that this this has the power to devastate you. And I did not want to become a person who had no hope. And so I thought, he even in this, we are going to have hope. And so it was very fitting that my coworker, who I don't think I had told her the name yet at that point, gave me this book on hope. And then we tried, at that point, I think grief takes a different form. You're trying to move forward, you never move on. I think people, as the weeks passed, people kind of go back to their lives, and you are trying to sort of stumble through the waters of grief on your own. We still have some precious friends who I am so thankful that they deliberately and proactively ask about Hoff and how we're doing, which just means so much because you feel like everyone else has forgotten.
Yeah.
We live on a very steep hill that has steps to reach the top.
Hmm.
And so I spent the weeks and first few months after that taking a lot of long walks and crying behind my sunglasses. And I would tell myself, when you get to the top of the hill, that's when the crying stops. And you walk in the house and you've got to be a mama to your little boy. So I would take my walks and cry, and then walk up the hill and get to the top of the hill and walk in the house and go on. And then 3 months later, we were pregnant again, which is a whole other story.
It really is.
Um,
Oh, man.
but but that was Hoff. And I think I'm not quite sure which part of the experience for us was harder, whether it was the moment in which we learned he was gone, or those months in which I carried him knowing he was going to leave us. I think what I learned is that, what do you do in those moments when, like, God's answer is no? When it's not the miracle that you wanted in the doctor's office?
Yeah.
When you're asked to carry this thing, what do you do in those moments? I am very thankful that my faith, I think, carried us through it, and I now have a very strong desire to share my story for other women out there who are faced with terminal pregnancies, and there is no redemption at the end. Their baby isn't going to make it full term. They're not going to get to spend a few hours with their baby until their baby passes. What do you do with those moments? What do you do with that story? And so now I feel like, I hope that this story can be just a little bit of comfort for them, at the very least, for them to listen and think, okay, I'm not insane for feeling this way or for praying this way. This is normal. This is totally normal.
Yeah.
I think that's what I hope most.
I think it will. I think it will help someone. I'm just blown away by your story. Because when we first started chatting, it just made me feel um like hopeless. I'll be honest. I was like, what would you do? You are excited. You're so excited to have a child. You're anticipating joy and happiness, and to be handed this, like, it's probably it's not looking good. It just felt so hopeless. But I'm grateful that you shared your faith and shared your hope for Hoff and his. Yeah, I'm really grateful for that. It was a glimpse into a really different side of the story of loss than I am used to experiencing. So thank you so much.
Mm.
Is there anything else you want to
You're
tell
welcome.
us about Hoff or this experience of his birth?
I think that he was a fighter. And my two boys that I have here on earth are very much like full of balls of energy and rambunctious and lively. And I like to think that his spirit was a little bit, I like to think that his spirit is reflective of that. And that's my toddler right now.
That's just fine. Yeah, it sounds like Hoff would just totally fit in. So that is wonderful. Paige, thank you so much for sharing Hoff with us. We really, really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.
We're so grateful to Paige for coming on the show and chatting with us about something that is a little bit different, as she anticipated the grief that she and her husband would feel when Hoff was born. So we're so, so grateful. Thank you so much, Paige, for coming on the show today. Head on over to our website, stillapartofus.com, where you can find the show notes, including a full transcript of this interview and any resources that were mentioned, where you can sign up for a short and helpful email newsletter, where you can learn how you can become a patron and support the work it takes to produce this show for just a few dollars a month, and lastly, where you can find out how to get in touch with us if you want to share a child's story on the show. The show was produced and edited by Winter and Lee Red. Thanks to Josh Woodward for letting us use his song Flickering Flame. You can find him at joshwoodward.com. Lastly, subscribe to this podcast and share it with a friend that might need it, and tell them to subscribe. Why? Because people need to know that even though our babies are no longer with us, they're still a part of us.
Nothing can dim the light that shines from within. Maya Angelou.